to an old SPI Quadra, Medieval Battles. This has 4 battles: King Arthur, Robert at Bannockburn, Tamerlane, and the Black Prince. Great. They each have their own exclusive rules, and at the very least, I'm preparing the King Arthur scenario right now. It contains some fairly extensive changes. I have played the Black Prince and Tamerlane long ago, when I was probably around 20 or so. A friend of mine had those two in folio version. I haven't played either of the others, so this is my first time that I'm going to be looking at King Arthur. The rules are fairly simple, actually. We got 8 pages total, but I mean, there's a couple pages out, so basically 6 pages of rules, SPI format. And then on top of that, there's the exclusive rules, which in the case of King Arthur is mainly to add man-to-man combat. And that's pretty much it, really. Okay, let's take a look at the rules. I'll go over the exclusive rules when I play each scenario. I'm expecting each scenario will probably fit on one video. They're not very big, and they're not too exciting. In terms of the pieces, the values on the pieces is different depending on the scenario. So again, we'll get to that at that point. But we do have some common points here. These guys are your route levels. That's how casualties are going to be assessed in this, is basically units become disordered and they fall back, and eventually their route level goes above 4 and they're destroyed. Or they retreat off the map and they count as destroyed. And we have these disobeyed and charge markers, which the disobeyed markers are to indicate that that leader can't rally forces he's stacked with. The charge markers are for calf charges. I don't think there are any actually in the Arthur. And then, maybe I'm mistaken there. And then another common thing we have is these lance markers, which are an indication that a unit has its lances still intact, which is a bonus during a charge. Okay, let's take a look at the rule book. Yeah, so actually we do have the values are common. So in general, leaders will just have a movement allowance on them. In the case of King Arthur, they don't. They have 2 other values on them, which we'll talk about. But then the normal units will have an armor type, which is either leather, mail, plate, or none, movement allowance, and a morale rating. And they might have different capabilities. So for example, these guys have a shield wall capability on their reverse side. That'll always be handled in the exclusive rules. You have single and double-sized counters. Facing only counts for the double-sized counters. The single-sized counters are assumed to be able to maneuver around quickly enough. We have different kinds of units distinguished in the game. We'll worry about that in general, but for the most part, the melee units are these guys. Missile units have their missile weapon attached on them. Yeah, that's elephant, shield, whatever. Right. So the base sequence of play is first, it's going to be an I go, you go game, but there's a little bit of interleaving in some of the aspects. So in each player turn, and they are the same, I hope. You start off with a route removal phase, and you remove route units from any combat units. You remove route markers from any combat units which are stacked with leaders who are not being disobeyed. And then any disobeyed markers come off at that point. Then any of your still routing units are going to run, and it's based on their route factor. The higher their route factor, the further they run, and it's also based on their movement allowance. Then the phasing player can move his unrouted units, and they can change mode if they have different sides to the same counter. I think only the Saxons do in this one. I'm not entirely sure. Okay. And then both sides are going to be able to conduct a simultaneous fire combat. Again, that's an attempt to add route to units. By simultaneous, they actually don't require that you follow a specific pattern, like, although it's similar to, like is used in the Wellington's victory. Instead here, everything is truly simultaneous. So I shoot you, the effect doesn't take place until at the end of the round, but we have to, kind of maybe work together as to being able to do that appropriately. And their working together suggestion is to say work down one side, from one side of the board to the other across everybody. But that's just really to help you remember who's fired and who hasn't. Results will all be implemented at the end of the entire fire phase. Then the phasing player is allowed to melee if he's in melee mode, and those results are applied immediately as they happen. And then the non-phasing player is allowed to conduct melee attacks if he wishes. And then you go to the second player turn, and it's a duplicate of the first. The game turn will move forward. They're always supposed to be 10 turns, and the 9th and 10 turns all have this special fatigue rule. What about movement? Well, in order to understand movement, you have your standard terrain effects chart, which specifies, actually this one's used in all the battles. Interesting. It specifies the movement point cost and any special effect on combat, which takes place. And those will be in exclusive roles if there's anything funky going on. You can't enter an enemy unit, but you can enter an enemy leader. Facing is only important, as I said before, for the double-sized counters. And the way that they're going to work is that they have a front facing, which is indicated by these little arrows. And their movement capabilities and to some extent combat are affected by their facing. You're allowed to move forward, and both halves of the counter can move forward in that case, at the cost and movement points of the more expensive terrain that you're crossing. You can pivot, and the whole unit pays the movement point cost for the half that's actually moving. Pivot being, something like this. And finally, you can do an about face, which will cost you 2 movement points out of your total. No matter what you are, it's fairly cheap for big cav units, if that's true. You're also allowed to march to your flank, and that costs you the movement point cost it would take to enter that hex plus 1. The single-sized units do not have anything of the sort. They don't have any facing. They can just move in whatever direction they like. Okay, plate and mail cav units. Now, cav units are distinguished by the little cav symbol, a slash across here instead of a horse in the front or something. That would be a little bit more obvious. They're able, if they're in plate or mail, are able to perform a charge. They have to move through at least 3 clear terrain hexes in a straight line, ending their movement adjacent to an enemy unit. I assume at the end of that 3 clear hexes. That's not specified, but if the charge is executed, you get a charge marker with an arrow pointing to the target of the charging unit. Well, there is no arrow on them. Guess you could use a lance for that if you want. Now, during the melee phase, you may perform melee attack against the target unit, and you'll get a special die roll modifier in your favor. If a charge is the object of a fire combat attack, 1 is added to the number rolled on the dice when consulting the fire combat results table. There it is. Okay. And I believe that's a penalty. And actually here it's going to be 2 is added in the scenario we're going to be playing. I think you're going to be rolling 2 dice for the fire combat. I hope. Stacking, in general, there's no stacking. Leaders can stack, however, but every other unit, the actual military units don't have the capability to enter the same hex as others, including during movement. Okay. Terrain effects, they're going to be what you expect. Units can't voluntarily leave the map, but if they leave due to route, they're considered destroyed. Fire combat. Fire combat takes place in the fire combat phase. What happens here? You announce which unit you're shooting at. You cross-reference the armor type with the weapon type and range. So, for example, hey, I've got slings at range 2 against your plate mail. I hit on a 2 or 3. 2 dice are rolled. Possible modifier for charging cav to make it harder to hit them. And if you're in the right range, you have caused a morale check. There's line of sight here. You can't shoot through enemy units, and there's some terrain which blocks line of sight as well. Obviously, you can't shoot across an elevation. I think the way the game is set up, there's not too much complex elevation rules. Actually, this isn't an elevation. This is an elevation change. I don't know what the hell this stuff is. A barrow surrounded by a ridge, but not big enough that there's an elevation change in the overall situation. Okay. And they go into a lot of details on the line of sight, but honestly, they're not, it's actually less complicated than usual, and they're not going to probably cause us any problems. Melee combat. If 2 units are adjacent to each other, you may attack the enemy, one of the enemy units. You can pick a unit to attack one enemy unit. Additional units can attack that same enemy unit. You announce the particular unit that's executing the melee attack. You use the melee combat results table, which is over here. You take the attacking unit type, compare it to the defending unit type. There's possible modifiers, and you're trying to get in a range, again, on the low side. So you get a bonus for charging, but you get a penalty for a double-sized unit trying to attack out its flank. And that includes attacking, say, if this unit is attacking into this hex, that's a penalty because it's not bringing the whole unit to bear. If it's attacking the center space, it does get its full value. That makes these double-sized counters actually kind of clunky. And let's see. Your result is going to be a morale check. If you're successful. If you're a cav unit equipped with lances, according to the exclusive rules in the game, you basically get, I believe, 1 use with them. It gives an additional -2 to the die roll, to the -2 for charging. And the defender takes a 2 penalty on their morale effects check. A lance marker can only be used once. If you lose your lance, if you use it, you lose it. And if you charge and don't end up meleeing, or you melee without a charge, you're not using your lance, so it doesn't go away or anything. All right, unit morale. So the main way casualties are caused in this, or effects are caused on the enemy, is morale checks. You look at the morale effects table. You might have some penalties. I don't see any listed on here, but like we saw, the cav charge cost this one. And it's going to indicate a number of levels of route that you add to your unit. Oh, here we go, morale. So the current route level is subtracted from the die roll. It becomes harder to stand if you're already, well, it becomes easier to keep routing if you're already routing. If fatigue is in effect, you get a penalty. Fatigue, I believe, halves your movement as well. If you're a double counter unit with a unit in your rear center hex, you get a penalty, even if that's not the unit that's attacking you. Some of these have to do with the specifics of this. Okay. Route movement, it's going to have to be towards the edge of the map that's your retreat edge. If you're unable to retreat kind of directly, i.e. zoom or zoom, you know, if you can't go in a direction that puts you closer to the map edge and you have to go around a unit or something, that's allowed. You're allowed to refuse to retreat if you can't make your full retreat in the correct direction, I believe. But for every hex that you retreat in the wrong direction or cannot retreat, you take a route point against you. And if you get above 4 route points, the unit's just destroyed and goes away. Facing doesn't affect route. Movement. Yeah, so here, if there's no way for a routed unit to be moved without increasing its route unit, the unit may remain stationary or it may be moved. But if it remains stationary, I think it has to take the entire route penalty that it would get from being stationary. I'm not sure why you'd be allowed to do that. I don't know what the purpose is. Leaders are considered combat units for movement, except they can stack. La, la, la. Okay, if a leader's not disobeyed and it's stacked with a routed unit, the route marker is removed and the unit's not routed any longer, no matter how routed it was. However, if the leader is stacked with a combat unit which suffers an increase in its route level due to combat only, then the leader gets a disobeyed marker and it can't rally any units that turn. Fatigue turns 9 and 10 are fatigue turns in all of the scenarios, I hope. The movement point allowance of each fatigued unit and leader is halved unless they're being moved towards their friendly route map edge. If they're being moved parallel or away, they only have half the movement points to use. Effects of fatigue on morale, there's a penalty on the morale. That's it, folks. Really, really simple rules. But we go into a little bit more when we go into the specific rules. But not much, to be honest. King Arthur, you know, adds one rule, one big rule. This appears to add a page of rules. about 2 pages. About 2 pages. And we can look at the King Arthur example, which I thought would be more complicated than some of the others, but it's about the same in terms of total rules for it. Some of them may have fancy victory point resolution or something. All right, let's send this up. That's just the intro to the rules.